on, and I reflected on and I never realized before how much she must have worried at the time. And the interesting thing is, and the greatest present she could have ever gotten is none of them ever got hurt. Now, I don't know whether my other brothers were in, you know, the kind of combat I was in, but clearly they were in the theater, and you know. But in any event, the point being, I never realized until I saw my daughter and how much she's so in love with those children, you know, and concerned about them and so on. Because I'm one of 7, and you know, you grow up and it's like, so anyway.
Sort of a 3-ring circus?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just like the one in the middle or something?
Yeah, I was in the middle.
And you say like 4 other people's names first before they get to yours?
Well, my mother did, yeah.
Yeah, I'm number 3. How did your mom deal with that?
Well, I never talked to her about it. I didn't realize this until she was dead and gone. But no, she's a strong person. My father left home at an early age. Had a drinking problem. He was an alcoholic. And so she survived all that, never changed her name or anything, never remarried, just raised those kids. So, but the point being that she must have really, really worried a lot, you know. Or maybe she didn't have time to worry with everything going on. Who knows, you know.
Did you find that you edited your letters to her so that she wouldn't worry?
Well, I didn't try to describe things that were, you know, gory or today so many guys were hurt or killed or whatever. I kind of told her about, you know, Italy and where we were and things like that. I guess it's similar to not talking about the war to anybody. You just, and the other thing is, when I do talk about the war, I talk about the funny things that happened in combat, which is kind of fun.
I'll make a note of that.
And one was very similar to what happened to John Embry. And that particular one was, we had just taken Hill 813, and we were kind of consolidating our position, and I was asked to take a detail down and set up some flares so that the Germans couldn't infiltrate at night. At least they'd trip these flares, and we'd be able to see them. And so we spent about an hour and a half, as I recall, although time escapes you, setting up these flares, you know, and these tripwires in the draw, you know, because that's where they'd infiltrate if they were going to. So somehow or other they must have had a spotter or something, and they just sent a lot of artillery in on us. And we took off and we tripped all our own flares. And there's like the 4th of July and skyrockets going off, you know. And it sounds crazy, but we got a little silly about it, a little giddy about it, a little laughing about it, and running back to our foxholes. But you talk about those things, you know. Another time, crossing when we were going to cross the Po River, the 1st Battalion of the 87th was the first to cross. I don't know if our company was the first to cross, but our battalion was the first to cross. But I do know that while we were on the south bank waiting for the boats and the rubber rafts that we went across in, that we were being shelled pretty hard. I mean, it was pretty heavy shelling. And mortars and artillery. And I remember being in a shell hole with a guy by the name of Murray Loeffler from New England. And all military people, the Germans as well as the Americans, when you set down a defensive area, you cover the area with fire. Like the mortars will, certain mortar battery will have a certain section that they have to cover, and they cover it like a checkerboard. They just index the tube and the sightings and so on and so forth, so that the shells fall in a pattern, so they cover the area. They just fire for effect. They don't see you, so we're in this shell hole, and we heard this mortar off to the left of us, whoomp, and the next one, whoomp, it's getting closer, and the next one landed right outside on our left, whoomp, and this goes off. Now we know the next one's either going to land in it or it's going to land on the outside. So he's trying to crawl under me, and I'm trying to crawl under him, and we're both laughing. I mean, it's kind of silly, but it's a dire circumstance, but the situation is kind of humorous. So, but you do remember the funny things more than you remember, some other things. So.
Did you think your sense of humor is kind of what helped you deal with everything?
Oh, I think so. I think your outlook on things is helpful, sure. I remember, when you have never been in combat, and sure, we went on patrols during January and February, but that very first night going up Belvedere, and I was a scout, at the time, a lead scout, and I remember a machine gun fire, and I decided I'd lay in a draw, but I would rather not lay in the bottom of the draw because probably that's where they're aiming down that draw. I wanted to keep that draw clear. So I remember laying on the side of the draw and these machine gun bullets going down this draw, and about every 15th round or 20th round, who knows, was a tracer. So you knew, almost like you could reach out and grab the tracer or the bullets or the tracer. And I remember saying to myself, because now you're in it, it's the first time when you're under fire, and I said to myself with sort of a half chuckle, what the hell did I ever do to deserve this? And I remember that very clearly as something I said to myself. But you do remember, a lot of the humorous things. And when you get together with the other 10th guys, you talk about those things, more so than, some things that are pretty gory or pretty drastic and so on. But, a lot of funny things.
Well, I should probably start by having you say your name on camera and spell it, so that researchers 100 years from now will be able to put your face and your name together.
Raymond Francis Farley, F-A-R-L-E-Y.
And your division?
10th Mountain Division, 87th Regiment, 1st Battalion, I think 1st Platoon. I can't remember exactly. You got some history. You might have gotten that. And I think 3rd Squad, but it's 50 years ago. It's hard to remember.
I have your serial number. 87. Let's see. Oh, you actually were assigned around, right? Started in the 90th, Company A?
Yeah, the 90th was replaced by the 87th when it came back, and they took most of the guys that had volunteered and put them in the 87th.
Did you go up to Kiska?
No, it's when I joined the 90th when the 87th came back from Kiska and joined us. That's when I don't know what they did with the 90th. I think they sent it off somewhere or whatever. But I was in A, then I was in C 87th.
90th dissolved. Okay, he was assigned to 86I and finally 87C?
Yep.
Thank God for the archives. This is all they have on you, though. They don't have much else. And they mentioned that they had a Bronze Star for Gaggio Montano. They ran a think, but we could certainly get to that. How about if you just give me a little bit of background about the rank that you served, and at Hale, you know, what were your duties? We'll kind of start at Hale and move forward if you want.
Well, I got to Hale in either late June or early July of 1943, and was assigned to the 90th. And then when the 87th came back, they got rid of the 90th and they put most of us into the 87th, and I was in Company C, 87th, and 1st Platoon, and I believe it was the 3rd Squad. So I was in a rifle company, infantry, sort of a line soldier, if you will. My duties were, I was a private at that time, and my duties were to, like any soldier, basic training, and then all of the mountaineering training. And my official position in the squad was lead scout.
Now, what does it mean when you're lead scout?
Well, there's a lead scout, and there's 2 scouts that go out in front of every squad. Maybe, depending on the terrain, and maybe as little as 20, 25 yards, and as much as 100 yards in front of the squad to sort of be the buffer between the main squad, and so that if there's some trouble, you reach it first. But the Germans are smart. I think at one time, I can tell you an incident that being a lead scout probably saved my life. Well, we're kind of digressing now, but this is on Belvedere, and either the morning after the night attack, when daylight arrived, there was a counterattack, and it could have been that day or the following day when my squad was asked to go forward down the unfriendly side, if you will, of Belvedere. And at that time, you do what you're told. In retrospect, I think we were meant to draw fire from the German side, particularly artillery. So my squad went out, and I was the lead scout. Then there's a number 2 scout, which is behind you, behind the lead scout. And the Germans did fire. They shot into the main body of the squad as opposed to shooting at the lead scout, which is one guy. So that's how it, you know, in retrospect, perhaps that you know, helped me. So that's something.
It's your phone, not mine, right? Yeah. Is being a scout more dangerous inherently?
Yes, yeah. I did get sort of a battlefield promotion to sergeant, and then I went to the rear of the squad, so that was less exposed.
How do you think you happened to be picked to be a scout?
Well, maybe they picked the dumbest.
What are they looking for when they look for a scout?
You know, I really don't know. I think perhaps, you know, if I were picking someone who's a scout, I would try to pick someone who you might feel reliable or not overly excitable, or you know, pretty calm. Might be pretty calm. You never know. Under fire, I don't know.
Like when you were thinking you didn't know what your task was going to be, were you thinking, oh, I'd like to be a scout?
Well, the fact that I was picked as a scout, I felt good about it. Mm-hmm. But I didn't think about the ramifications of that at the time. If I would have, I probably would have ran.
Did they have a pretty high attrition rate, scouts?
Oh yeah, definitely. Particularly with mines, you were the first into some areas, and mines, and of course small arms fire when you approach a machine gun nest or you approach any, you know, you're one of the first to be, because you're closest, you know. So yes. Yeah.
When you were at Hale, did you go through any special training for being a scout? What sort of?
It's hard for me to remember, but I remember certain exercises we would go through to pick certain routes through terrain, or pick certain routes so you wouldn't be seen, or to pick routes that might be less difficult to travel in with your skis and your equipment. Or certain times you might pick the most difficult terrain to go through because it's the most sequestered, the most hidden, if you will. But beyond that, I don't recall, anything overly specific, because your basic job is to make contact with the enemy first, I guess, and it's pretty simple instruction.
When you were at Hale, what was the most difficult thing you found about the whole training?
Well, I think we had extremely heavy packs, and I remember, you'd really feel it in your shoulders. I would guess, people say 90 pounds, they weren't 90, but I would say they were in excess of 50, maybe as much as 55 to 60 pounds. And of course, when you haul that around at that altitude, I remember pulling on your shoulders, and physically that was the most difficult. I didn't like the Pando hack that we all had, and you know the story about that. And that I didn't like. When we'd come back into camp, walking while you'd approach, you could just see this cover. It's like 10 times worse than Los Angeles,
Did it affect you much?
Well, I never got ill from it. A lot of people were, the hospitals were full of guys that had to fall out and couldn't report for duty. But it never bothered me to that extent. But I never had the habit of smoking, so that might have helped. So those two things physically. Other than that, the D series and the cold, more the boredom than anything, because when you're out for 5 weeks and you're on maneuvers, there are times when you're not doing anything for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time, and we couldn't light fires, so you stand there and kick a tree to keep the circulation in your feet. It was kind of boring, But other than that, the most humiliating thing was being hooked up to a sled in the early days, like a mule or a dog or a horse. We were hooked up, 4 of us, or 3 of us, I can't remember how many, and to pull. But they got rid of that. That was kind of, that isn't what I signed up for.
So you were actually the beast of burden.
Yeah. They started to do that, and I think they were experimenting with it, but they quickly, whether it was because people rebelled or whatever, better off just carrying stuff, So, but that was sort of a humiliating thing. I remember that very clearly. Then the dryness of the air, and the altitude. Some of us, I had a constant crack in my lip. And when I'd smile, it would break and it would bleed. I remember that very clearly. We didn't think about protecting our skin at that time. In fact, they didn't issue anything to put on your skin. They were smart enough to give us goggles for the glare from the snow. And I do remember getting partially snowblind. Snow blindness is very painful, but it's not anything permanent. And you feel like you've got sand in your eyes. And I guess I didn't have my glasses on early enough or long enough or whatever that day. And then at night you'll see it's flashes of light, it's sort of snow blindness. But after, really what happens is your retina becomes sunburned. And other than a few, what are those things that you see on the ceiling, drifters or little spots or whatever, that's the only permanent damage. But I remember that very clearly. And then I really liked the idea. I learned how to, survive and keep warm in the mountains. And I did a lot up until 2 years ago, heliskiing. I have about 2 million vertical feet of helicopter skiing. And 1 or 2 times we were close to having to stay out all night. But it was never a concern of mine because I knew I could take care of myself or anybody that was with me on how to, what we should do and how we should hunker down and so on. And so I really valued that part of the training. And the double duck down sleeping bag and the boughs that you would cut from a tree and get in underneath a fir tree, just like a toast, really nice and warm. So you look forward to going to bed at night because you sleep and so on, and it's not as boring, if you will.
When you signed up for the 10th, did you really know what you were in for?
No. You mean in terms of the training or in terms of the war or whatever? I thought we might. I didn't know what it would be like, but actually what made me decide to volunteer was I clearly wanted to be a pilot, and but I also wore glasses, so I knew that was out. And I remember being, somewhat disappointed about that. I even remember talking to my mother about it, which I regret because maybe she felt bad because I talked about that. But then I somehow read about the quotes unquotes ski troops. I didn't know anything about 10th Mountain at that time, but in fact, I think I remember seeing that famous picture that was on the Post, the cover of the Post, the magazine or whatever. And so I somehow volunteered, 3 letters of recommendation. I don't even remember who signed those letters of recommendation. But, and of course the Army, I guess, was all too willing to fill up the ranks of the 10th, and so off I went. And we got out of school a little early, so we did not graduate with our class, but we did get a diploma. They gave it to us anyway, even though we didn't finish the year. But I think it was only 2 or 3 months at the most that we didn't do. I mean, because I didn't go in the service until June of 43. So I don't know why we were out of school a month or 2 early. I just can't remember, but we didn't graduate. We didn't go through the ceremony with the rest of the class and so on and so forth, but they gave us the diploma. And I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, that's where you were inducted. And then put on a train and somehow went through all the process of got off the train in Pando, Colorado, like everybody else. And I was delighted to be there.
Were you an avid outdoors person before?
Oh yeah, I had skied before and did a lot of hunting and played a lot of different sports outside, more of the rugged type sports. And so it was just a natural thing to do. And I loved it up there. I didn't have any problem with it, but the things you do remember that in terms of most difficult things were this heavy packs and the boredom at times, because the Army doesn't have everybody moving at the same time. As Bert has said, sometimes you think it's in slow motion, Other times when you're moving like crazy, and but when it's time to go, you go. But there's a lot of standing around and waiting. And so those are the things I remember that I disliked.
Did you feel like you were healthier when you were out of camp?
I didn't think in those terms in those days. Somehow someone had convinced us that the difficult training, the working so hard at high altitude. We had extra rations, by the way. We had a ration and a half as compared to a normal Army ration. That it was healthier rather than... And I wasn't smart enough to realize that the Pando hack might not be so good, but on balance, I think it was a healthy thing, you know.
Did you like being in camp or out of camp better? On maneuvers?
Well, I was very happy to get back in camp, you know, when we did. But yeah, I enjoyed being out. But 5 weeks was, you know, we were ready to come in.
What was it like when it snowed, that huge snowfall during D-Series?
Well, you know, snow was just a part of our life. You know, you'd wake up in the morning, there'd be a lot of snow outside. You'd be, I never slept in my tent because it was your breath would condense and it would get, moisture would be sort of icy and this and that. I'd just dig in under if there was one available, you know, a fir tree. Cut a lot of boughs and make about a 5-inch bed of boughs and put your sleeping bag on top of that. And it was very good insulation. There was no problem. Always tried to get sequester some kind of snack so you have something at night.
There's no fridge to Riz. You got to bring your own fridge.
Yeah. Well, the key thing was to be able to dry your stuff out. You know, if you wanted to keep something cold, that was easy to do. But no, whatever snacks I sequestered were dry snacks. They weren't anything that you'd have to keep cold or keep warm or refrigerate or whatever.
Now, when you were going through boot camp, is there anything else that sticks out before we move on to?
Well, I think sticking out was a lot of different things. I remember rock climbing training. That sticks out in my mind. It's something that when I signed up, I didn't think about that. I didn't mind it. I did well at it, but I remember saying to myself, this is not a sport I'm going to take up when I leave. I remember you can get spread-eagled on a rock and on a rock face, and your muscles can get a little shaky. We were always belayed, though, so you didn't have that worry. And learning to rappel was kind of fun, and so on. I remember the fun of skiing up on Cooper Hill, and a lot of the crashes that occurred. The guys that were supposed to be mountaineers that didn't know how to ski at all, you know. It was kind of funny.
Now you went there and you could ski, so were you just considering that sort of playtime or advanced training?
I felt it was fun time. You know, we were bivouacked up there and we were skiing during the day. Well, fun, you know. We had it was a T-bar. It wasn't a chairlift or anything, it was a T-bar. And I guess it was, you know, very, very long. I can't remember how long, but they did tell us it was the longest T-bar in existence at that time. I'm guessing it was 3/4 of a mile long, I don't know, something like that. T-bar, you know. So, so I never had any trouble, you know, using a T-bar, you know, in later life. But I remember the skiing, it was very pleasant, a lot of fun. Most of the skiing we did, though, was cross-country skiing. And you had these heavy packs, so your skiing style was one that kept you from falling. And there were a tremendous number of broken legs as a result of, you know, trying to move in deep snow with very long skis, which in retrospect was probably not very smart. I mean, those skis had to be close to 6.5 feet long. 2.4, 2.5 meters, something like that. Not 2.5 meters, but 2.2, 2.3, something like that. Very long. And in the deep snow on a heavy pack, you had to really ski with a style that kept you from falling. So to this day, whenever I ski, people say, well, you never fall. Yeah, I do.
So do anything you can to prevent falling, right? You know better. Well, once you fell down, how did you get up?
Well, you had to take the pack off, particularly if it was deep snow. But that was easy. You just slip the shoulder straps off. And then we had a web thing that hooked around your waist to keep that pack from moving.
Did you find it easier to ski up or downhill with all that equipment?
Well, obviously, downhill was a little less exertion, but going uphill was tough because you had this pack, Just to give you some idea, the M1 rifle we had was 10.5 pounds, okay? The double duck down sleeping bag, which depending on whether it was dry or wet, I don't know, had to be, it's hard for me to remember, 4 pounds, 5 pounds, something like that, and then a mountain stove, and then fuel, and then all sorts of, clothing, gear. We had skins for the skis, and we just carried just about everything for survival in the cold, and all it added up to a pretty heavy pack. So you tried to go light, as light as you could, how GIs are, soldiers are. So, but you didn't want to shortchange yourself too much if you're out in the cold. And I guess a lot of guys got some frostbite, but I didn't. I was very patient at kicking a tree.
You did that a lot?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Just to keep the circulation in your toes,
Well, I suppose it did seem a little more exciting than school. I mean, that's kind of what you had just come from.
Oh yeah, it was totally different. You of course you were bitching about it all the time because soldiers bitched. If you weren't bitching, it was a bad outfit. It had low morale. You had soldiers that were bitching. You had good morale in the division. You've never heard that?
No, I never heard that.
Oh.
I did hear certain things along the lines of officers being, I think it was chicken shit.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, somewhere, it's. We had a great sort of joke we told in those days. You can turn that off if you want while I tell you this. But there's a story of this officer that retired from the military, but he couldn't get over being an officer, so he ran his home like the military. And he had 3 little boys. One was 2.5, one was 3.5, one was 5. And he had them falling in the morning, and close order drill, and rules and regulations, and dress code, yes sir, no sir. So one day there's a window broken in the house. So he calls the boys in one at a time. First the 5-year-old comes in, he clicks his heels, and Bobby, reporting for duty, sir. And Bobby, you break that window? He said, no sir. He said, that's all, Bobby. He clicks his heels, about face, marches out, salutes, calls in George. George comes in real sharp, clicks his heels. And George, reporting for duty, sir. George, you break it? No, I didn't break that window. He bowed face on it. And then he comes this little half-pint kid. And kid clicks his heels and salutes. Jimmy, you reporting for duty, sir? He says, Jimmy, you break that window? He said, yes, sir. Is there anything you want to say before I sentence you? He says, yeah, how do you get out of this chicken shit outfit? So So it's kind of a joke about getting out of this damn tent, you know.
But once you got in, did you ever want to get out?
No, it's, you were in the service, and you were you looking forward to maybe someday going back to civilian life or going back to college or something? Sure, but I wasn't ready to transfer out of the 10th and go to some other unit. I mean, the 10th was the 10th, you know. And
did you feel like there was a certain bond among all the guys?
Well, I think we were proud of the outfit. At the time, I don't think we recognized how special it was in terms of the skills that we had and the skills we were to achieve and attain, and or the intelligence of the unit. But we did know that it was one of the few outfits in the whole Army or the whole military. And I guess there were others where you could go away to officers' candidate school and come back to the same outfit, not necessarily the same company, because that probably wouldn't fly, but because you could just see if they picked someone who was a non-commissioned officer and made him an officer and they come back to the same squad, that might be difficult. But they came back to the same unit, the same outfit. Well, you remember we were talking about that, so we knew a little bit about that. You have to remember, I was, 1943, I guess I was 18 or 19, or just, I guess I was 18 when I went in. I became 19 in November of 43. Yeah, I was 18. So, you know, you're not very introspective at that time. I mean, you're a young guy, and you're in the service, and there you are. It was kind of, we were proud of the outfit. When I came home, which wasn't very often, because I remember, I guess almost a year before I had my first leave. We were proud of the outfit. We wore the little regimental pin on the hat, and so on and so forth. And of course, that's what's important to the morale of a division, which helps you get through things. Did I tell you this? As a result of some very extenuating circumstances, I was asked about a year ago to talk to a high school assembly shortly after 9/11, because all the high school students were a little bit, I don't know what the word is, nervous about, are they going to have to all go into the service or what? Well, I know what it was. In fact, they asked me to speak like 3 years before that, and I said no. And then 2 years before that, I said no. I said, well, those kids don't want to hear about the war. But after 9/11, and my daughter, coincidentally, had a son that she wanted to get into the Latin school in Chicago, which is one of the more difficult schools to get into. And the headmaster of the school that wanted me to speak had a connection there. So my daughter said, "Dad, do it." So I said, okay. So I agreed to speak to this class. And, you know, I tried to give them a feel for, you know, what war was like. And I used excerpts from Fire on the Mountain to give them some visual things. And I gave them some descriptive things. But at the close, I said that I didn't like the basic premise of The Greatest Generation, because I said that's a knock on all the guys that fought in all the other wars. Why were we any better than them? And I said it's also a knock on you, because they're telling you that this is the greatest generation, and so now you can't, how are you going to match that? I said, we weren't the greatest generation. We did what we had to do, and you would do the same thing. You were faced with the same set of circumstances that I faced as a lead scout in combat. You'd do exactly the same thing. And said, you don't think ahead of time that, well, I'm going to go win the Bronze Star today. You're presented with a certain set of circumstances and you react. And because of all the training that you go through at home, because of all the sports and all of the competitions you're in and all the value systems that are built into your life by everybody, teachers, parents, all of your total experiences, you'd do the same thing. So don't feel that you don't have it or you don't have the intestinal fortitude to do what we did. You'd do it. And I believe that. And I just don't like the title of that book, and I don't like the basic premise of it.
Did you feel like some of your intestinal fortitude was developed in the field because of the great challenges that you faced?
Well, no, I think you have those basic basic value system and beliefs, and to a point where you're in a situation and you react favorably to it. Now, does everybody react favorably? No. Some people break down, but they're very few. So there were wounds where people shot themselves, but it's very obvious when they do because they want to get out of this thing, you know. But by and large, you know, that's a small minority of people. Some are very legitimately, I don't know what you call it, but just the tension and the nervousness, and it gets to them, and they have a nervous breakdown. But those are very few as well. By and large, people are in that situation, and you react favorably to it. You don't think ahead of time, you know. The guy that wins the Medal of Honor, he doesn't say, well, I'm going to go win a Medal of